Welcome to the 2021 Major Donor Symposium. In this breakout session entitled Powerful Ways to Share Your Impact with Donors, David Sutherland, Global CEO of ICM, will guide you through a more strategic and relational approach to raising the funds that are critical to fulfilling your mission. As you listen to the content, feel free to engage with the Q&A feature, where our team members will be standing by to address your questions. Q&A will be available during the session today and for 15 minutes afterwards. For additional resources, including a copy of the slides from this presentation, please return to the breakout session event page after the session to download these resources. This breakout session and the others offered today will be available on demand beginning tomorrow. As we get started, let's kick off our time together by letting everyone know where you're joining from and the organization you're connected with. Just type that into the chat feature now. Enjoy!
Well, good afternoon. This is Dave Sutherland, and I'm quite sad not to be there in Florida with you. I'm in North Carolina, and unfortunately was unable to travel, so I guess we're going to do this session by Zoom. But Brad has very kindly offered to let me share a few of the things that we've learned at ICM through the years, through the decades, about using data in order to try to motivate donors. We have found that having the right sort of metrics and information around how your ministry is working has been quite a powerful impact to raise resources, and especially with major donors. So I thought I would start by maybe introducing myself a little bit. It was back in 1984 that my wife and I attended Urbana, and we felt that God was calling us to live a life overseas as tent makers and to be involved in ministry and be involved in poverty reduction. And so I ended up getting a master's degree in taxation, and then I got a law degree, and so I became an international taxation lawyer so that I could live overseas. My wife got her master's degree in linguistics so that she could teach English overseas, and then we set about creating a career overseas. So in 1997, we moved our family over to Hong Kong, and we've been there ever since. And we did that. I took a job with Morgan Stanley, and I ran Morgan Stanley's tax function across all of Asia, and eventually became chief financial officer in all of Asia for Morgan Stanley, overseeing a multi-billion-dollar business across the whole continent. So from a secular point of view, it was a great job, a great platform, but we were really there for ministry, and so we got involved in quite a few different ministries in Asia, always trying to be involved in things that have to do with evangelism and also poverty reduction. And so we probably got actively involved with more than a dozen charities and ministries, but eventually we got more and more involved in a smaller number. And so we focused our attention now mostly on international care ministries. So when we first met ICM, it was a brand new organization, 4 or 5 years old, maybe had an annual budget of $20,000. And so eventually I became chair of the board and then got extremely involved in the organization. And then in 2013, I left Morgan Stanley and became ICM CEO full-time. And so that's where I've been since then. ICM has grown from that small organization to being, I think, the largest charity in the Philippines, as we are perhaps not quite as big as World Vision, but I think we're bigger than Plan, we're bigger than Child Fund, we're bigger than almost every other secular organization, certainly bigger than any other religious charity Christian organization in the Philippines. And so we work with 10,000 churches, and we've designed strategies that we hope are having a great deal of impact. So along that way of growing the ministry and the charity, we've had to learn a lot of different sides. I, as CEO, usually describe my job as involving two different segments. There's the part that faces the poor people that we're trying to serve. So there is the poverty reduction program that we're doing, which is both reducing spiritual poverty, evangelism, discipleship, as well as reducing physical poverty. So there's kind of interacting with the poor and trying to create strategies that are especially effective to do that. And the other part of what I do is try to gather resources, to gather assets, to convince donors and stakeholders to support what we do. And those are two different functions, so the inside and the outside function. And today we'll probably focus a little bit more on the outside function. And Brad wanted me to talk in particular about how you can use data to impact your organization. So let me start with just a few words about ICM in particular so that you get a little context of not that any of you really care about ICM in particular, but I thought I would give this some context so that you can see a little bit of how we explain what we do, and perhaps that will be of some interest to you in your own organizations. When we talk about ICM, one of the things that we talk about is that we focus on ultra poverty. That is that we deal with people who earn less than 50 US cents per person per day. And that means that the average person that we're dealing with is earning 26 US cents per day. So 50 cents is kind of the ceiling for us. And so among those people, and that is very, very, very desperately poor. If you earn less than that, you're almost not able to live, because you have to earn a certain amount in order to subsist. Everybody has to eat a little bit of something every day, or they won't live. So ultra poverty is the poorest people in the world. We do it in the Philippines in particular, and there are not as many higher percentage of the population that are ultra poor. Probably in the Philippines, it's maybe 7 to 8% of the population. There's parts of Africa where it's 40% of the population, but ultra poverty is the lowest economic segment on our planet. So what does that mean to live in ultra poverty? That more than 50% of the people that we serve live with an illness in their family, a chronic illness, and so they're not just dealing with not having enough income, but that has physical ramifications for them as well. 32% of them have no electricity. 10% of the children that we serve are clinically malnourished, which means you take height and weight calculations, and they are diagnosed. They can be diagnosed as malnourished. So these are very, and there's scores of other data points that we have to also validate and to understand the lives that these people deal with. And so those are the people that God has moved our heart to try to help as much as we can. And then during COVID, things have gotten a lot worse. The World Bank says that it's likely that 150 million people on our planet will fall into extreme poverty. The extreme poverty has gotten better and better over the last few decades, and so we've seen a really hopeful way that the world is dealing with poverty over the last 30 years probably. But this is an exception. This year, so many more people have fallen into poverty, and so it's become quite a dramatic experience. And so what has ICM done? We are quite a strategic development organization, but in the midst of this pandemic, we had to pause a lot of our programs. And during this time, because the people in the Philippines were prevented from moving around or functioning in their normal economic way, that means that the poorest people couldn't wash clothes for someone else. They couldn't drive a little bicycle that they use as a taxi cab. They couldn't work as construction workers. They couldn't do much of anything. And so as a result, these people don't have any safety net. And so they were hungry. And so what we decided to do is to deliver meals to people that were in emergency need. So we've delivered about 14 million meals. We have actually delivered goods to almost exactly 1 million Filipino households of some sort. One of the most powerful things that we've been able to deliver is vegetable seeds to help people start their own vegetable gardens. And we've done a lot of research to indicate that the vast majority of people are actually planting the vegetables that we give. And so they live on little itsy bitsy bits of land, and then we show them how to use old plastic Coke bottles, and they can cut them in half and put a little bit of dirt in them and then just hang them from the side of their house and then grow vegetables of variety sorts. And we have now distributed almost 300 million seeds, 250 million seeds to people. And we think that will create at least $30 million worth of vegetables that people can use to feed their children. We have actually cured nearly 10,000, been able to deliver anti-malnutrition food, ready-to-eat food that has clinically cured about 10,000 children of malnutrition during a time of great, great hunger. So we feel that God has really allowed us to have a real impact. If it's aside that all of that is just during COVID times, just to explain a minute about how ICM operates in normal times, we have designed a program we call Transform, which means that we work with about 10,000 local pastors, and then periodically we offer each of the whole network an opportunity to apply for a community-based program, which would be every 4 months we would launch 500 to 800 community-based programs. And we call these transforms. And a transform program lasts for 4 months. It would be a once-a-week meeting in each community. In each of these meetings, we have 30 minutes of values, spiritual values, 30 minutes of health lessons, and 30 minutes of livelihood lessons. We teach the local pastor a curriculum on how to do evangelism and discipleship. We teach, we bring in our own health trainer, we bring in our own livelihood trainer. So 2 people then teach, and each community, we invite the 30 poorest people in the community. No more than 10 can be for the church. And we validate each person that comes into the program with about a 17 criteria that we use that we call to create a poverty scorecard. So it measures, it looks at things like whether they have dirt floors, whether they have access to water, access to electricity, the size of the house, what the roof is made out of, things like that. And we have an algorithm to try to be sure that the people that come into the program are the poorest people. And so those 30 people come in. The pastor chooses 6 people from his church that will be counselors. And so 6 counselors, 30 participants, 1 pastor. There's 37 families that are involved in each Transform program, and we run about 2,000 of those programs every year. And so it grows quite sizably. And at the end of that 4 months, we see that the average ultra-poor family experiences 167% increase in their household income. 88% of the malnourished children are cured. 39% decrease in depression. We see, and we have been able to graduate 1.3 million people through this program. And so, we're trying to have a big impact across the country. When we describe what ICM's characteristics are, we try to always use four words. First, that we are focused. We only work with those who subsist on less than 50 cents a day. That is an exclusive target. Secondly, we're effective. We've gathered 100 million data points, and that demonstrates the changes in life that I mentioned. And I mentioned 3. But we've got hundreds of other metrics that we use in order to try to measure, to validate that the Transform program is actually improving lifestyle. We do it efficiently. We're able to deliver this whole program to every family member for about $10 for the whole 4 months. That's not $10 a month or $10 a year. That's just $10 period. And the last word that we use is scale. We have, there's a lot of people that can say they run 1 orphanage or they do 1 pastor training program, but try doing it 1,000 times. And it's just a fundamentally different thing. And so we have been able to graduate 1.3 million people from this Transform program. We're on our way to our 2nd million. And so that's kind of how we describe ICM. So I do all of that just so you can kind of maybe get a flavor of the way that we approach that. And so now taking off your hat of learning about ICM in particular, just how would you react as if you were a donor that heard that kind of a message? And perhaps Brad likes that kind of message that I just gave you because it includes so much data, so much numbers, and so he feels like that perhaps there are some other organizations that would be interested in understanding, a little bit of how we approach it. I guess so I've just got a slide here which has 4 points that I wanted to talk about, which is our characteristics. And our characteristics, there's 4 things I wanted to mention. First of all, when you are presenting data like this to donors, the first thing I would say is that you should be realistic. You cannot expect donors to digest all the data that you may have in your mind. And perhaps this is a message for me, maybe than as much as for anyone else. But donors, they want to know that you know what's going on, but they don't actually want to know everything that you know. They don't need, most of them don't need the details. They want to ask you usually 2 or 3 questions to be sure that you actually know what you're talking about. And so they want to know that you know what you're talking about. But once they know, they feel that you know what you're talking about, that usually is good enough for them. They don't really need to know more than that. So that means that when we put together marketing materials, sometimes we will put together a pitch document that looks like a prospectus that you would use in business that has numbers and data and is a very rigorous approach to the data that we put together. But the vast majority of donors, and this includes major donors, and it includes major foundations, things, the vast majority of them, they don't actually need that data. They sometimes want to know that the document exists, so sometimes it's helpful to send it to them and they can just leaf through it and know that you've done your homework, but they don't actually want to read it. I usually tell the people that we work with here that if we have an elevator pitch, if I'm with someone, a prospective donor, and they want to know what ICM does, and you have that, what Jack Welch used to call the elevator pitches, you've only got time in the elevator to explain what your job is doing. What are you going to do? When I ask many of our ICM staff, what would you do if you have 30 seconds to describe what they say, what ICM does to a donor, they would normally start with a description of how the Transform program works, and they would talk about the logistics of how we've designed it and why we've designed it and how it's efficient or whatever. But that's actually, I don't think in my experience, the best way to motivate donors. The best way to motivate donors is I say, here's the message to communicate. We are, at ICM, we are serious people that are dealing with a serious problem. Almost the most important thing for us to deal with is to explain the need of the people that we are working with, that their lives are in terrible shape, and it's kind of inconceivable how human beings live in those sorts of conditions. So just to visualize and validate the difficulty that people are that we're working with are dealing with. And then the second thing is that we are serious people, that we know what we're doing. And that message is conveyed in a lot of non-formal ways. It's things like you're on time for the meeting, you actually have your documents ready to go. When you open your briefcase, all the stuff doesn't fall out all over. When we're bringing donors to the field and they go out into the communities, that there is water in the vans, and so we've thought ahead to do that kind of stuff. That the pitch documents don't have grammatical errors in it. There's a lot of things like that just show a donor that these guys know what they're doing. They seem to know what they're doing. They run a good event. They print a good annual report. They have attention to detail. If the donors believe that you have that you're dealing with very, very poor people that need help, and that you are a competent human being who is doing your best, that is usually all they really need to know. And so in that sense, I kind of start with the proposition that the most rigorous data is not necessarily something that will move the donors. But the other thing that I want to mention to you is, and this is a little counterintuitive, but given the first point that I made, but the second point is that when you do collect the data, you need to be really excellent at the data that you collect. And I think that for us, we feel that information collecting needs to be in the DNA of the organization. This is something that's very hard to do kind of, on the side in the abstract. At ICM, we have a whole team of people that collect data, and that is their full-time job. And we also have a full team of people that do nothing but collect stories for donors, and that is their full-time job. One thing that we feel is a mistake is to take the people that are normally the CEOs or the area heads, the people that are running the programs, and ask them on the side to collect data, because they've got a full-time job. They really need to stay focused on what they're doing every day. We don't want them to interrupt their day-to-day lives by getting, every time a donor comes to visit them on the plane, that they have to arrange the hotels and the vans and things. We don't want them to have to stop doing what they're doing in order to collect data. There needs to be a focus on collecting the data. Now, when you have a focus on collecting data, you can't afford to hire really expensive people to do that. So you need to create a simplified way to collect it, and then work with people that are from the local community and train them to do it, so that you pay more local rates to collect this data, so that it doesn't it doesn't absorb too much of the ministry's resources. But at ICM, we were kind of founded by investment bankers, and investment bankers don't really move forward without making decisions, without having data. And so we tried to collect as much data as we could. And one of the things that we have learned is that if you're good at or you're trying to be as good as you can, that you get that resources beget resources, meaning that there are a lot of serious academic people that are looking for good opportunities to create academic materials, and they will work for you often for free. Now, if you go to the local university and you don't know anybody, and you ask them, here's this research project, they will often quote you a price to work with them that is astronomically high. Because many of the professors, they earn a salary, but they really make a lot of their personal living by charging for their time, and they do side projects, and they get paid for it, and that's kind of part of their compensation package. And the universities themselves, many of them try to buttress their own resources by lending out their academic resources, and so when they charge for those things, they charge really, really high numbers. So it's really hard for any charity, any ministry to justify paying full rate for a professor's time or for a university's time. But the most valuable commodity for most universities and most researchers is access to high quality data and access to high quality information that actually have an intellectual, rigorous thing. They all want tenure, they want to get published. And so if you're going to give them the context to do something that has not been done before, not just do a simple evaluation of your program, but to look at issues that have not been looked at before, they will fight for the right to work with you, and they will do it for free. So at ICM, we're a little bit unusual. We are unapologetically evangelistic in what we do. We are evangelical Christians, and we do proselytize, and we don't apologize for it. But we explain our messaging in a way that a secular person can understand. And we explain that in the Philippines, it is a fundamentally Christian country. And so if we work with the local resources, the local church, that is the best way to impact as many people as possible. And any business person would know that you use the local infrastructure that exists. You don't try to recreate your own infrastructure. And so, with that sort of an explanation, we find that maybe half of our funding comes from secular sources, and that actually creates some interesting opportunities for us. So we have made a relationship with Innovations for Poverty Action, which is some of the highest quality data collection and data analysis people in the world. And they have taken a special interest in us because they're interested in understanding how religiosity affects progress out of poverty. And so we have gathered access over the last decade to some of the top researchers in the world, and we've never paid anybody for anything. In fact, often the researchers have paid for their own research. They've actually ended up paying us. And so we get data, we get credibility. Actually, the guys who won the Nobel Prize in Economics last year were people that use randomized control trials in order to analyze economic data. And these are some of the same people that we're working with. So these are very impressive people, and we've been able to generate relationships with them. When I have gone to some of these guys' conferences, at one point IPA ran a big conference with 130 big NGOs. And I looked around and I said to the organizers, am I the only faith-based organization here? They said, no, that can't be true. And then they looked through it, and after 5 minutes of looking, they couldn't find a single other one. They said, no, I guess you're the only one. A few years ago, I went to Harvard for a one-week training session on how to be a CEO of a nonprofit. They had 160 CEOs there. The average size of the organizations that were represented were $25 million of revenue. And so these are big organizations, and they were from all over the world. And as far as I could tell, I was the only faith-based organization represented at Harvard. It is at that Harvard event. It has just struck me how disconnected our worlds are. The faith-based ministries, the Christian organizations are a massive ecosystem all to ourselves. But we hardly ever speak to the secular research system, and those guys are a massive ecosystem as well. But the secular guys don't really know much about what the Christian guys are doing, and the Christian guys don't know much about what the secular guys are doing. And so at ICM, we are trying to stand with a foot firmly in both worlds, and we're trying to use academic research in as rigorous a way as possible, so that we can say that upholding the name of Christ doesn't involve necessarily compromising the search for the truth. And so we've had a lot of positive feedback from secular sources, and I think that a lot of our Christian donors are kind of refreshed to see that sort of thing. So, I think that that when you gather data, that you actually if you are willing to invest in doing it right, you can actually get disproportionately high impact. And maybe I could mention here that there's a couple of types of research that you want to think about. One is just certainly measuring what you're doing. So measuring your inputs. And we ran so many trainings, we helped so many people, this many people graduated from the program. Those are all ways to measure what you have done. And then there's another way where you're measuring the outputs, and you're saying how many children have been fed, how many people have become Christians, how many things have happened. And so there's a certain number of organizations that actually don't measure anything at all. Then there's some organizations that measure their own actions, and there's many fewer organizations that measure things that happen as a result. But outputs. But with that said, measuring outputs by itself, if you do it with a simple before and after sort of analysis, that will not get the academics very excited about it, because you need to know whether your program is actually causing this impact or not. And that usually requires that you run a randomized control trial, so that you prepare a certain number of communities for the program, and then the computer chooses that these guys are going to get it and these guys are not going to, and then as a result, these guys are not going to get it. And then you follow both of them over a long term. And that allows you to compare the people that got the program that you ran against people that didn't get the program that you ran. And then the difference between those two is the best way. That's called the gold standard in academic research. And doing randomized control trials is not for the faint of heart. It is actually a very challenging sort of thing to do, and it requires probably years of preparation of your organization to do that. But if you can run randomized control trials and do it in a rigorous way, you will get an enormous amount of attention to your organization from a lot of different funders. It could be quite transformational for you. The third thing that I wanted to mention is when we provide this data, our suggestion is that you try to be genuine in the use of the data. Most donors want to feel like you didn't just gather the data for the purpose of convincing them to give the organization money. It's not for the donors. That they want to know that you're gathering that data for excellence of execution, that you know what you're doing. You're using it in order to improve your operations, not as an excuse to raise funds. And so they want to see not just that you're gathering the data, but that you are responding to the data, that if the data proves that that something is working or not working, if it's not working, then you stop doing it. And if it is working, then you do it twice as much. And so all of us have the ability to have the maximum impact on the people that we serve by increasing our attention to the most effective programs. We're doing 6 things and all of them are good. And so a lot of organizations don't want to make hard decisions and say, we're going to de-emphasize the odd numbered ones so that we can double up on the even numbered ones because they're having a higher impact. But that's what donors want to see. The last thing I'll say is when you gather this data, highly important that you be transparent with the data. I think that's true for financial sides. In ICM's annual report, which you can get online if you want to look at it, we have a little line that we say, our financial data is available to all donors. If you have any questions, just ask. And so because we are willing to provide almost any data that someone wants, we almost never have a donor who asks for financial information. The mere fact that we are willing to provide it means that we don't have anything to hide. And I think that and honestly, I really don't understand how charities, how ministries can significantly raise money from major donors and expect not to give them access to that financial information. As a donor myself, when I have other organizations ask me if they won't show me their annual report, so their financial statements, if that stuff is all confidential, then I just feel like I don't have the same confidence in the organization. And the same thing is true not just about financial information, but about operational data as well. When you, I guarantee you, some of what you do doesn't work very well. For sure, that's true. It's true for all of us. And often the donors will be more motivated if you explain to them what you did some work and you found out something didn't work and you decided not to do it anymore. and you responded appropriately. That will make them way more excited about you than you just telling them all the good things and pretend that everything works perfectly. Because if you talk to a donor and you talk to them over a period of time and you tell them 10 things in a row and everything is perfect, their intellect tells them that that cannot be true. For sure, there are problems here. If, on the other hand, you tell them one or two things that are really good, and then you say, and then this third thing, that didn't really work, and so now we are trying to, fix that, and then you go to the fourth thing, and you say, that one was a mediocre one, and then the fifth thing is really working. Then by the time you get to the fifth thing, the donor knows that they believe you on the fifth thing, or they believe that you believe it at least, because when you saw something that didn't work, you were willing to be honest with them and show them that it didn't work. And so being willing not to hide losses, to be willing to be transparent about what doesn't work, I think is every bit as important as being able to show people what does work. It is an enormously powerful sort of thing that you can do. And so those are kind of four things we're talking about. You can be realistic, you can be excellent, you can be genuine, you can be transparent. I just thought I would share before we go to the Q&A time that a little bit about the issue of kind of secular versus Christian here and how we measure things. Many of you may be familiar with a group called the Accord Network, and so that is a organization of more than 100 Christian NGOs, and they all do poverty reduction and from a Christ-centered point of view. And some guys in London called Edo Research have been trying to help them figure out how to measure impact, and in particular how to measure spiritual impact, like how many people actually became Christians, how many people actually became disciples of Christ. And so they just did a survey of a whole bunch of these NGOs, and what they said is, now mind you, these are organizations that have been self-selected into their higher end kind of Christian organizations, and they have self-selected into groups of people that are focused on research in particular. So these are not necessarily the average organizations. They just did a survey of all these people. They said that about 9% of them say they really don't collect any data at all, so only 10%, which is probably because we've self-selected into a lot more to people that are more rigorous. There are about a third of those people measure outputs. Outputs meaning what they do, and then. And a third of them measure simple outcomes, and then only about a quarter measure complex outcomes. And so, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So, it's not easy. So these are actually very high-end organizations, and only a quarter of them are measured or feel that they are able to measure more complex outcomes. The thing I thought was most interesting is they asked these charities, these ministries, what kinds of outcomes are you most interested in measuring? And about half of them said that they are more interested in measuring spiritual outcomes than they are in measuring either social or economic outcomes. And I think that I've seen that across the Christian space. It's one thing to talk about measuring impact on malnutrition, or how many savings groups you created, or how you changed consumption. But what Christian ministries want to be able to measure often is how they've been advocates for the gospel, how they've expanded God's kingdom. How many people have become a Christian as a result of what you do? How many people have become disciples of Christ, fully devoted followers? That is really, really difficult to measure. And so we've tried to do a bunch of work around this. I think that if you tried to do this yourself, that it is easy to explain the number of people that raise their hand. And, we showed the Jesus film, and X number of people with their hand in the air and said, I became a Christian. But if you've been around the block long, you will know that and you do it in any size, that those may not be the most accurate way to measure impact. I know ICM in our early days, we were doing lots and lots of film showing, and we were recording that a quarter of a million people were coming to Christ every year, and we did that for 5 or 6 years in a row, all in the same province. And at one point we realized, wait, there's only 2 million people in this province, and if you add up our last 7 years, we've had like 1.4 million out of 2 million people raise their hands. And I know there had not been a massive revival in that province, so it just sort of undercut our confidence in that data. And so we've been working to try to to do surveys of the people that we impact, to measure whether they really understand salvation by grace, whether they understand that the Bible is the primary way that God speaks to us, whether they become evangelists themselves, whether they become more regular churchgoers. And so both theological as well as on Christian practice, so that we're trying to work with these guys in London and with Accord to develop a common platform where many of us can create a way where we can measure spiritual transformation, so that donors will be able to say there is kind of an accepted, Christian donors will be able to say there's an accepted way to measure impact and a spiritual impact. And so when different charities are trying to explain to donors the priority of their own programs, that there will be a platform for them to do that. And so if any of you are interested in this, I'd be happy to put you in touch with the right people on how to be more rigorous in measuring spiritual outcomes. I think that it's one of the most important things that's going to happen in Christian ministries over the next few years. I hope is that we will develop some common way to talk about spiritual outcomes in ways that all of us can appreciate. Listen, so I kind of am coming to the end of my time here. I just want to say thank all of you for your attention, and happy to answer any questions. I don't mean to understate how the challenges of doing this. I suspect that many of you would love to have that kind of data, and you see the struggles in your own organization to make that all happen. And I guess I just would encourage you that creating good data is not something that happens overnight. It's something that happens over a couple of years. You certainly would need the CEO of the organization to be behind this, to create some pivot around your organization's use of data and your fidelity to evidence-based actions, so that you gather the data that you need and that you respond appropriately. And then I think that will excite and energize the major donors. So I hope that this has not been too dry. It's been a little bit interesting to some of you. So with that background, I'm ready to answer any questions. So I understand that what you do is you enter in the questions that you have in the chat room, and then I will answer those questions. So sorry I'm not in Florida to see many of you. I gather a lot of you are online anyway, but I hope that this time next year we'll be able to gather again, and God will have freed us from the scourge that we're living with right now. So I will be praying for all of you. I think all of us together are a unified. Together we can make an impact for God's kingdom across the world, whether it's in the United States or outside. And I will pray that God gives